Hi folks, welcome to Set Apart Homestead. This is Travis, and yes, we got a little snow this morning. Not much though, less than an inch. And I know those of you that live up in the Arctic tundra near the North Pole are laughing because, well, less than an inch is nothing. You don't even measure it when it's that little. I get it, you're right. But it's kind of cold out here, the wind's picking up, and according to the weatherman, there is another Arctic vortex coming, so cower in fear, for we shall all die. No human has ever experienced this cold of temperature. Or at least that's the way they make it sound on the news. It's that we're all going to die, and humanity has never experienced this cold of temperature, so just be prepared and don't stay out in it any longer than you have to, I guess. I mean, goodness. Anyways, I wanted to talk today about red flag laws. I'm sure many of you know all about them and have been keeping up on them, but I'm afraid there may be some that don't know because it's not really been getting a lot of notice. The media certainly doesn't want to talk about it. And even amongst, pro-Second Amendment conservative circles, they seem to not be talking about it too much. And I think it's definitely something that needs to be made known and talked about and combated. These are pretty scary things. There are 14 states, as of the making of this video, there are 14 states that have passed them, and there's Minnesota, I believe it was Thursday or Friday, a red flag law bill passed their House committee. It left the House committee, and there's a pretty good chance of that passing there. So what is a red flag law? To give you the simplest answer, for those of you that don't know, think of an ex parte order, an order of protection. It's under that same premise, except instead of, saying that you can't come within a certain distance of someone, it's saying that the state can seize your weapons, seize your firearms, even though you're not a felon, even though you've committed no crime. The police or a family member, and they vary a little bit from state to state, so maybe one state is not exactly this way, but for the most part, they're very similar. Generally, a family member can petition the court and say, my ex-husband or my ex-boyfriend or my uncle or my ex-wife or whatever, I feel that they're just not mentally stable enough to own firearms, or I feel that they're a threat to themselves or a threat to others, and I believe that the state should take away their guns because I believe that they could potentially pose a threat. The judge rules, says, okay, the police go out, they seize the person's firearms. The person doesn't even get a chance to, at that point, to say, hey, wait a minute, what about my side? Generally, they schedule a court date, 2 to 4 weeks later, and the person gets to come and defend himself, him or herself at that point, to try to, get this order removed so that he or she can retrieve their property. So at that point, after they've already been taken. Now, the left has been selling this as, well, there's people out there that have, mental illnesses. And, they still qualify to own a firearm, so they buy a firearm, but they have a mental illness. And we need to pass this type of law so that the family members that recognize this can say, hey, this person probably does not need to own a firearm because they have this mental illness, some type of psychiatric problem, and we need to take that away from them. And that's how they're selling this for the most part. And it sounds really good because, when the left sells something to the public, they wrap it up in a beautiful packaging and a beautiful bow on it, and they make it sound really good because, we have children we have to protect. But the truth is that it violates the Second, the Fourth, the Fifth, the 14th Amendment, the right to your property, the right to jury, a state cannot infringe upon those rights, and of course, obviously, the right to own a firearm. These aren't people that's committed felonies. Maryland, in the first 3 months in Maryland, they seized I believe around 300. I can't remember if they seized 300 firearms or they seized firearms from 300 people. So it's one of those two. And that's just one of the 14 states. The problem is, well, there's many problems with these laws. First off, most of them don't really define what family member is. There's no legal definition. Now, you and I might have, a common definition, but in matters of law, they don't necessarily go by the common definition. There's usually defined in a law what, these terms are defined as, and they don't define what, a family member is. So anyone that's a distant relative, that could say, well, that's my second cousins on my third, aunts, twice removed, and so on, and can say that this person, I don't believe this person is fit to own a firearm. And are they an expert? Do they have some medical degree? No, they don't care about that. And so they go and they seize them. A lot of people have deemed these laws the Angry X law because, you have a bad breakup with a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, and they get mad at you. All they have to do is go and say, you know what, this pot guy's crazy. He really shouldn't have, these firearms, and they'll come and get them. The burden of proof for the complainant is very thin in most of these states. There's very little that they have to prove. Mostly just their statement. They can, they're asked to give examples. Well, anyone can make things up. And then when you go to try to get back to have this order removed, very seldom so far has anyone successfully been able to have this order struck down and to get back their property. Because once the state takes your firearms, it's highly unlikely that you'll get them back, and if you do, it's going to be a fight with lots of legal fees and a long time to get them. So how does this affect us? Well, there's several things, and I know that many of you are saying yes, but pretty much all these 14 states, those are the most liberal states in the union. Okay, I live in a conservative state, that's not going to happen here. Well, do a little history on the United States and just say the last 50 years or so, when a particularly liberal law gets passed. Sure, it first happens in like New York and California or Illinois or Maryland or Connecticut, maybe Florida, at least recently in the last couple of decades. And then what happens? Little by little, it starts spreading. And that's exactly what's happened with this one. The first one, I believe, was in 1999 in Connecticut, and it just kind of was on its own. And then a couple of school shootings happened, and then it's starting to explode. And like I said, Minnesota will most likely be the 15th state unless, something happens to slow it down and stop it. The thing is this isn't even being talked about by most politicians, even some on the right, as necessarily gun control. This is a public health. This is a public health thing, is what they're talking about, so that people don't snap and go shoot up buildings. That's what they're selling this as, and why that could be a possibility that they're used to successfully do that. It's highly unlikely, and what most likely will happen, like the slang term, or whether it's called the Angry X, this will be used to inflict damage on broken relationships, or use the state to get the state involved in your little personal vendettas. It could easily be used that way. Here's the thing, think about it. So you're pro Second Amendment, maybe. Probably most of the people watching this channel are. Even though you may not have a bunch of guns, you may not be necessarily a gun nut, you still most likely are pro Second Amendment. And, well, you're probably a prepper, and you're probably a homesteader, maybe. Maybe you're a homeschooler. Maybe you're a right-wing Christian. Why, today's standards, that's considered an extremist, okay? And it wouldn't take much for someone to convince a judge that, this cousin of mine, twice removed on my mother's blah, blah, blah side. They've got a bunch of guns, and they store up stuff, and they're always talking about how the government's so wrong. And they teach their kids at home their wacky religion about God. You know, they're a little crazy, and I think he's dangerous. You know, that's the kind of people that do stupid stuff. And I think that this guy, I think we need to, you know, do my due diligence as a member of society and protect them, Your Honor. I think we should, you know, remove this person's firearms. And so most likely it happens. This is a dangerous road. Another form, and it seems to be one that's really catching on, of, you know, seizing firearms. Let's go back. Let's change course just a little bit on the same subject, though. March of 2012, which was 9 years ago, Venezuela passed and enacted gun confiscation, basically outlawing private ownership of firearms, and they confiscated firearms. Fast forward almost exactly 7 years later, and there have been reports of hundreds of people killed, and people locked up, and people assaulted, and many different forms of violence, but definitely many people have been killed in Venezuela by the security forces because of all the political uprising and the very near civil war scenario that's going on in Venezuela. Personally, I think it is a civil war, but let's just play it on the safe side and call it a near civil war. But 7 years ago, the government took all their guns and said, you know, you don't need these. We'll protect you. And then 7 years later, people are starving to death, no medication, no water, all sorts of things. And the state is going in and telling them to behave and shooting people and locking people up because, well, they're disarmed now. I mean, we could give you examples all throughout history. Most of you all know these things. So with the, you know, sudden, I guess not sudden, but with the increased spike of hard left social communism that is happening in America, definitely in parts of America and in Washington, this fever, this radicalism that's happening, and then now these laws being passed. It doesn't take too much to get from point A to point B to figure out that these laws could easily be used to go in and confiscate citizens' firearms. You know, why patriotism could be considered a mental disease. And then I know what you're saying. Well, that's not my state. That's not my state. It's coming, okay? There's 14 already. You give it a couple of years, and there'll be more than that, I assure you, because that's how these things go. Look at every left-leaning, liberal type of law that's passed in the states. It starts in 1 or 2 states, and then it just starts growing, and then eventually it starts snowballing. Something will happen, and it'll catch on like a wildfire, and it'll just spread all across the states. And of course, the other argument is as well, the Supreme Court was eventually going to step in and stop this. I mean, we do have a pretty good slate of conservatives on the Supreme Court, and I would hope that would happen. And I want to believe that they would, step in and say these are unconstitutional laws. The problem is that with the Supreme Court, it's a very slow process many times, and what damage will be done between now and then, before that, the Supreme Court finally gets around to, shooting down these laws. So it's something that you need to get on your radar if you don't have already. And I'm not an expert on it. I'm going to assume that there's going to be a lot of viewers that's probably going to be more knowledgeable and have kept up more than even I have. And please chime in. But these are something that American people need to be aware of and worried about, because this isn't some kind of proposal. It's not like that Green New Deal that's just being talked about. These are things that's actually in law in many states. And they're coming after, taking away your right to defend yourself. And I don't want to terrify and scare people and put us into a frenzy. That's not the point of this. It's just something that we need to be aware of, because the way that these laws are written, they're so vaguely written that they could be used in more ways than what their uh, said intended purpose is. So, anyways, be aware of them. Red flag laws, they don't necessarily go by that name in every state, but that's, if you do a search on red flag laws, you'll start finding information. Unfortunately, if you, get on Google and type in red flag laws, you're going to find the first 2 or 3 pages are going to be, articles of how these are doing such great things for the, mental health and the, safety of communities. So you're going to have to dig a little bit deeper to find, real information on them. All right. I am going to go inside and warm up a little bit. The wind's kicking up and starting to get a little chilly. All right. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.